The bill slid across the polished table and stopped in front of me, turned so I could read my own name at the top. "There," my Aunt Carol said, folding her hands like she had just done something generous. $4,260. You can afford it.
You lived off her for 3 years. The room was very quiet. My Uncle Dennis studied the wall.
My cousin Dana held her phone low against the table, and I saw the little red dot. They had come to the funeral home to plan my grandmother's service. And somewhere between the flowers and the guest book, they had decided to plan my humiliation too. I looked down at the paper. My name, my address, an itemized list. Casket, preparation, chapel, staff, and the word at the bottom, in bold, balance due. I did not cry. I wanted to, but not in front of them. Instead, I heard my own voice come out flat and small. "I never saw this bill before." "Well, now you have," Carol said. Here is the thing nobody in that room knew, the thing that would take a week to surface. I looked at that total, $4,260, and even in my grief, a quiet part of my mind said, that number is wrong. Not too high, not too low. Wrong in a way I couldn't explain yet. Because my grandmother, who forgot nothing, who labeled her spice jars and kept receipts in a shoebox by year, was not a woman who would leave a bill like this for anyone to fight over. But I get ahead of myself. Let me go back. My grandmother's name was Margaret, but the whole town called her Meg, and I called her Nana. She raised me for most of what mattered. My mother left when I was 9. Not dramatically, just quietly, the way a tide goes out. And one morning, she was in a different state, with a different life. My father did his best, and his best was a man who worked 2 jobs and slept the rest. So it was Nana's kitchen, where I learned to be a person. Nana's back porch, where I learned that you can be sad and still peel apples for a pie. Nana, who came to every school thing, sitting in the 3rd row in her good blue coat, clapping too loud. Carol and Dennis were Nana's children. My mother was too, technically, before she disappeared, which made me the granddaughter. The branch of the family that had caused trouble, in Carol's telling. I grew up understanding, without anyone ever saying it directly, that I was the charity in the family. The one they were kind to on purpose, so they could feel kind. 3 years before that day at the funeral home, Nana had a stroke. It was a bad one. She came home from the hospital needing help with almost everything. Dressing, bathing, remembering which pills were which. The family had a meeting about it. I remember Carol saying, in her reasonable voice, that a facility would be the responsible choice, and reading out numbers, and everyone nodding at the numbers. And I remember Nana in her chair, not able to say much yet, gripping the armrest, looking at the door like she wanted to run through it. So I said I'd move in. I was 32, renting a small place, working from home doing medical billing, which, and I want you to remember this, because it matters later, meant I read insurance statements and itemized invoices for a living. I gave up my apartment. I moved into Nana's spare room with 2 suitcases and a box of books. I learned to lift her safely. I learned the exact way she liked her tea. I learned that at 3 a.m, she got frightened and just needed a hand to hold. And that if I sang the old song about the river, she would settle. The family called this living off her. That is not an exaggeration or a wound I am inventing. That is the exact phrase Carol used at Thanksgiving when someone asked how I was managing. "Oh, she's living off Mom now," Carol said, laughing lightly, and passed the potatoes. As if I had moved in for a free room instead of moving in to change an old woman's sheets at dawn. As if 3 years of my life were a scheme. I let it go. I always let it go. I told myself the truth was in the room upstairs, in Nana's face when she saw me in the morning, and that the truth didn't need Carol's permission. Nana died on a Tuesday, in her own bed, holding my hand. It was peaceful. I want you to know it was peaceful, because so much of what came after was ugly, and she deserves to be remembered as she was. A woman who went gently in the house she loved with someone who loved her. The ugly started 2 days later at the funeral home. The funeral home was called Okafor and Sons, an old brick building on Chestnut Street with soft carpet and softer lighting. The director was a woman named Mrs. Okafor, Grace Okafor, silver at the temples, calm the way a still lake is calm. She had a way of speaking that made you feel your grief was welcome in the room, not a problem to be managed. The family had arranged the meeting without telling me the time, and then called me 20 minutes before. So I arrived last, flustered, into a room that had already decided things. That was when the bill came out. That was the moment I opened with. But here is the first small thing I noticed. The first thread. When Carol pushed the bill at me and announced the balance, Mrs. Okafor's face changed. Just slightly. A small pause. The kind of pause a professional gives when something doesn't sit right and they are choosing their words. She said gently, "Mrs. I'm sorry, before we go further, let me confirm the account status. I'd like to check the file downstairs." Carol waved a hand. "It's unpaid. We got the estimate last week. She's the next of kin who was living there, so it goes to her." Mrs. Okafor looked at Carol for a moment. "I'd still like to check the file," she said, and there was something underneath the softness, something steady. "It's our practice." "There's no need," Carol said, a little too fast. "It's no trouble," Mrs. Okafor said, and smiled, and the subject was, for the moment, closed. But I saw her write something small on her notepad, and I saw that she had heard the same wrong note in the room that I had. That was clue number 1, though I didn't know yet what it was a clue to. We got through the rest of the meeting. Flowers, a photo board, the hymns. Carol chose everything and announced each choice as though she were being very brave. Dennis nodded. Dana filmed. And I sat there, holding a bill with my name on it, agreeing to nothing, saying nothing. Because Nana was 3 days gone, and I had no fight left in me. Afterward, the family went to lunch. I was invited in the way you are invited to something so that later they can say they invited you. At the restaurant, it got worse. An aunt by marriage, Lorraine, leaned across the table and said with great sympathy, "It's just such a shame you're not able to help with the costs. After everything Mom did for you?" I put down my fork. "I'm sorry?" "Well," Lorraine said, glancing at Carol for backup, "we all understand money's tight for you. Nobody's judging." Everybody was judging. That was the whole point of the sentence. "I never said I wouldn't help," I said carefully. "I said I'd never seen that bill before today." Carol sighed, the long, suffering sigh of a woman surrounded by difficult people. "Nobody's attacking you," she said, which is what people say right after they've attacked you. "We just think since you were the one benefiting from living there rent-free, it's only fair." And there it was again. Benefiting. Rent-free. As if the rent I paid hadn't been 3 years of my 30s, and a body that still ached from lifting, and every night's sleep I'd given up. Dana, across the table, was still holding her phone at that angle. "For the group chat," she said brightly when she caught me looking. "So everyone who couldn't come knows what's happening with the arrangements." I understood, in that moment, that there was a story being told about me to people I'd never even meet. That somewhere in a family group chat I had never been added to, I was the villain who wouldn't pay for her own grandmother's funeral. The girl who lived off Meg for 3 years and then wouldn't even chip in at the end. I went home that night to Nana's house. My house. For now. Though I suspected that was about to become another fight, and I sat in her chair. And I did cry. Finally. Alone. Where none of them could use it. And then, because grief makes you restless, I started going through her things. Not to take anything, just to be near her. To touch the objects her hands had touched. That was when I found the second thread. In the drawer of her writing desk, under a stack of birthday cards she'd saved from me going back 20 years, there was her old address book. The fat one, the pre-stroke one, with her small, careful handwriting. I turned the pages just to see her writing, and a business card fell out. Okafor and Sons Funeral Home, Chestnut Street. I turned it over. On the back, in Nana's hand, in ink that had faded a little with time, she'd written, "Handled. Don't let them fuss." Handled. I sat very still. Because that word did not sound like a woman who had left an unpaid balance. That word sounded like a woman who had taken care of something, deliberately, in advance, and had a private opinion about how her children would behave when the time came. Don't let them fuss. I didn't know what it meant yet. I told myself I was reading too much into an old card. Grief makes you look for messages everywhere. But I put the card in my pocket, and I did not tell Carol. The next few days, the pressure came steady, like water finding the low spot. Dennis called, and in his heavy, patient way, walked me through a payment plan. He drafted it himself, he said, to make it easy on me. 4 monthly payments. He'd already put my name on the top. He read it out over the phone like he was doing me a favor. Like a man helping a drowning person into a boat that he himself had pushed them out of. "You just sign it at the service," he said. "Keep it simple. No need to make a scene at the funeral home. I'd like to see the full account first," I said. "The actual invoice from Mrs. Okafor." A pause. "Carol has all that. Don't complicate things." That word again. From a different mouth. Don't complicate, don't fuss, don't make a scene. It's remarkable, isn't it, how the people setting the trap are always the ones begging you not to look too closely at the floor. And I almost signed. I want to be honest about that. I was exhausted and grieving and outnumbered. And there is a kind of tiredness that makes you willing to pay $4,000 just to make people stop looking at you like you're the problem. I had the pen in my hand, at the kitchen table, over a printout Dennis had emailed. I told myself, just pay it, keep the peace, honor her by not fighting at her own funeral. Then I looked at the number again, 4,260, and I thought about the card in my pocket, handled, and I put the pen down. Because I do medical billing for a living. And if there is one thing that job teaches you, it is that a number on a page is not the truth. A number on a page is a claim. And every claim has a source document behind it. And if you are patient, and you are not afraid to ask, you can always find the source. So I decided quietly to find the source. That was the same week I learned how deep it went. That was the midpoint, the part where I understood I hadn't been dealing with pettiness. I'd been dealing with a plan.
It came out sideways, the way these things do. A younger cousin, Marcus, Dennis's son, the only one of them who ever treated me like a person, called me. He was uncomfortable. He kept saying, "I probably shouldn't be telling you this." "Tell me," I said. "There's a thing in the group chat," he said. "It's been going on a long time, like before Nana died, like 2 years. What kind of thing?" He hesitated. "My mom and Aunt Carol, they've been saying you were, draining Nana's savings? That you moved in to get control of her money. There's like a running thing about it. Screenshots of her bank stuff. My mom said you were spending her pension." I sat down on the stairs. 2 years. For 2 years, while I was changing her sheets and holding her hand at 3 a.m, they had been building a story in a room I couldn't see. Not a spontaneous insult at a funeral. A campaign. A slow, patient poisoning of every relative's opinion of me, so that when the moment came, the funeral, the money, the estate, everyone would already believe I was the greedy one, and the bill in my name would look like justice instead of a setup. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, and his voice dropped. "I heard my dad on the phone last week, before the funeral home meeting. He called them Okafors. He asked if there was any prepaid arrangement on the account, and then he told them there wasn't. He said, and I remember this because it was weird, he said, 'There's no prepaid plan. Just send the balance to the next of kin at the residence.'" I stopped breathing for a second. "Marcus," I said, "why would he ask if there was a prepaid plan and then tell them there isn't one?" "I don't know," Marcus said. "That's why it stuck with me." Why would you ask a question and then answer it yourself? You ask a question like that when you're afraid of the answer. You ask it, and the moment you hear the answer might be yes, you rush to bury it. Because a prepaid plan means there's no bill to hang around someone's neck. A prepaid plan means the whole beautiful, cruel machine falls apart. I thanked Marcus. I told him he'd done nothing wrong. And then I called Okafor and Sons and asked to speak to Mrs. Okafor. She called me back that evening, after hours, which I later understood was a kindness she chose on purpose. "I've been hoping you'd call," she said. "I wasn't sure how to reach you directly without going through the others, and I didn't want to speak in front of the family until I was certain. I've now had time to pull the full file, and my heart was going hard. Your grandmother had a prepaid funeral contract with us," Mrs. Okafor said. "Paid in full. It has been on file and paid for 3 years. I closed my eyes. "There is no balance due," she said gently. "There was never a balance due. The invoice that was presented to you at the meeting was an estimate for a new arrangement, as if nothing had been prearranged. When your uncle called last week and told us there was no prepaid plan, we had no reason at that moment to contradict him. The account was under your grandmother's name, and we hadn't yet cross-referenced it to the meeting. I did that cross-reference the same afternoon I met you, because something in the room didn't feel right to me. Handled. Don't let them fuss. There's more," Mrs. Okafor said, and here her voice changed, softened almost. "I think you should come in. Alone first, if you can. There are details in this contract you'll want to hear before the others are in the room. Your grandmother was very specific about how she wanted this done." I went the next morning. Mrs. Okafor sat across from me in her quiet office with a cream-colored folder in front of her, and she opened it, and she showed me my grandmother's prepaid funeral contract, signed, dated, paid in full. And at the top, under designated agent, The person Nana had legally named to carry out her wishes, the person the funeral home was contractually bound to answer to, was my name. Not Carol, not Dennis, not her own children. Me. She came in herself, Mrs. Okafor said. I remember her, actually, once you told me the family story. A small woman, very direct. She said she wanted everything paid, everything decided, so that no one would have to argue about it and no one could use it. Those were close to her words. So no one can use it. She named you as her agent, and she left this. Okafor slid a sealed envelope across the desk. My name was on the front, in Nana's careful hand, and she told me the date on the contract. It was 3 years old. Nana had signed it and paid it in full in the same month I moved in to take care of her, the month of her stroke. The month the family had a meeting about facilities and numbers, and Carol read out costs, and Nana gripped her armrest and looked at the door. She hadn't just been frightened that day. She'd been deciding. She had gone as soon as she was well enough to get to Chestnut Street, and she had quietly closed the door on every future argument. She had looked ahead 3 years to this exact week, to Carol pushing a bill across a table, to a phone call asking if there was any prepaid plan, and she had said in advance, no. You will not do this to her. I didn't open the letter there. I couldn't. I sat in that soft-lit office, and I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry in front of anyone. And Mrs. Okafor sat with me and didn't rush it, the way she must have sat with 1,000 people in that room, letting grief take the time it needs. When I could speak, I asked her one question. Did the family know about the prepaid plan? She was careful. I can tell you what's in the record. Your uncle called and asked whether a prepaid arrangement existed. That is not a question people usually ask unless the possibility is on their mind. And when a colleague of mine began to look it up, he said, and it's noted here, that there was no such plan, and we should simply bill the residents. We did not, at that point, argue with the next of kin. She paused. In my experience, people who are certain there's no prepaid plan don't call to ask if there's one. And they certainly don't tell you the answer before you've looked. They had known, or at least suspected strongly enough to try to bury it. Nana had prepaid it 3 years ago in a small town where everyone talks. Somewhere along the line, one of them had heard a whisper. And rather than let it be true, rather than let their mother's love, for me stand, they had tried to erase it and stick me with a duplicate bill and use my grief and my exhaustion to make me pay for something that was already, quietly, a gift. Mrs. Okafor and I talked for a while about the service, which was in 2 days. And then, because she was a wise woman, she asked me a question that turned out to be the whole story. How would you like to handle it, she said, with the family? I thought about it for a long time. I could have called Carol that night and destroyed her over the phone. I could have posted the contract in whatever group chat Marcus would have leaked it into. I could have arrived at the funeral with a lawyer and a raised voice. Believe me, part of me wanted to. Part of me had wanted to for 3 years. But that is not what Nana would have wanted. And more than that, it is not who I wanted to be in the last room I would ever share with her. So I chose something quieter. When we all meet to finalize the service, I said, the family will be there. They think there's a bill. They think I'm going to sign a payment plan. I looked at her. Just do what you normally do. Confirm the account status, out loud, the way you tried to at the first meeting. Read the contract. Don't accuse anyone of anything. Just let the truth be in the room. Mrs. Okafor nodded slowly, and I think she approved. "The document speaks for itself," she said. It usually does. The finalization meeting was the day before the service. The whole family came, in their dark clothes, rehearsing their grief. Carol had a folder of her own. I think it had the payment plan in it, ready for my signature. Dennis had his patient face on. Dana had her phone. Lorraine had already told 2 more relatives that I was still refusing to contribute. And I could feel it on me when I walked in. The cool politeness of people who have decided you're guilty. We sat around the same polished table. Carol took charge immediately, the way she always did. "So," she said, "we just need to finalize the payments today. I've drawn up a simple plan. Before we discuss any payment," Mrs. Okafor said, and her voice was warm, but it filled the room. "Let me confirm the account status for everyone so that we're all working from the same information. It's our standard practice, and I tried to do it at our first meeting." Carol's smile tightened. "That's really not necessary." "It is necessary," Mrs. Okafor said, still gently, but there was granite in it now. "Because I will not allow a family to leave my office confused about money at a time like this. I owe your mother that much." She opened the cream folder. "Margaret established a prepaid funeral contract with this firm." The room went absolutely still. "It was signed and paid in full 3 years ago," Mrs. Okafor continued, reading calmly. "Casket, preparation, chapel, staff, the full service you are planning was paid for by Margaret herself, in advance. There is no balance due." There has never been a balance due. The invoice that was presented as owing was a fresh estimate, as though no prearrangement existed. I watched Carol's face. I watched it go from confusion to disbelief to something else, a flicker, fast, that she couldn't hide, because it wasn't surprise. It was the face of someone whose gamble had just been called. She had bet that no one would check. She had bet that grief and shame and a family chorus would push me into signing before anyone looked downstairs. That can't be right," Dennis said, and his voice cracked in the wrong place. "You were told there was no prepaid plan," Mrs. Okafor said, and looked at him steadily. "When you called last week and asked whether one existed, I have the note. You asked, and then you instructed us that there wasn't one, and that we should bill the residents." She let that sit in the air for exactly as long as it needed to. She did not accuse. She simply said the true thing, in a calm voice, and let everyone in the room do the arithmetic. Every head turned to Dennis, then to Carol. The relatives who had spent 2 years being fed a story about greedy me were now watching the 2 people who'd fed it to them scramble in real time. "There's one more thing the contract specifies," Mrs. Okafor said, "and I'll read it because it's part of the record and it affects who I answer to today." She looked around the table. Margaret named a designated agent, the person legally authorized to make decisions about her funeral, and the person I am bound to consult. She turned the page toward the room, and she said my name. Just my name. Not Carol's, not Dennis's. Mine. I have thought a lot since then about the sound a room makes when a lie stops being believed all at once. It isn't loud. It's a kind of collective exhale, a shifting of chairs, the small human noises of a dozen people rearranging everything they thought they knew about who the good ones were. Carol tried, once, weakly. She wasn't well when she signed that. After the stroke, she signed it the month before her stroke advanced, Mrs. Okafor said quietly. And this wasn't quite the timeline I'd understood, but she had. The dates and I did not correct a woman holding the file. She was entirely herself. I met her. She was one of the most clear-minded people to sit in that chair. And she told me, in those words, that she was arranging everything so that no one could argue about it. And no one could use it. She closed the folder. I think we can all see now what she was protecting against. Nobody signed a payment plan. There was nothing to sign. The bill in my name had never been real. It had only ever been a costume that a cruelty wore to look like a debt. I did not gloat. I want you to know that, because I think it's the part that matters most. I could have. The room was mine in that moment. Every relative who'd believed the worst of me was now looking at me with the wide eyes of people ready to apologize. I could have made Carol and Dennis crawl. Instead, I stood up, and I said something I'd decided in advance, because I knew I wouldn't trust myself to find the right words in the heat of it. My grandmother paid for her own funeral 3 years ago, I said, so that none of us would fight about money over her body. I'd like us to honor that by not fighting now. There's no bill. There's nothing owed. The service tomorrow is already taken care of. By her. I looked at Carol, and I did not make my face cruel, though it cost me something. The only thing I'd like to add is the flowers. I'll pay for those myself. She liked freesia. Let's give her freesia. And I sat down. That was it. That was my revenge, if you can even call it that. I let the truth be the loud thing, and I let myself be quiet. Because the contract had already done everything that needed doing. There is a particular kind of justice that comes not from what you say, but from what a document says while you sit calmly beside it. Nana had built that justice 3 years ago in an office on Chestnut Street, with a pen and a checkbook and a heart that saw all the way to this exact table. The service was beautiful. There was freesia everywhere. I bought too much, on purpose. Half-forgotten relatives came up to me one by one and said things like, I didn't know, and we were told. And I said, I understand, and I meant it, because I did. They'd been handed a story by people they trusted. That's how it always works. Carol and Dennis kept their distance. Carol left early. I heard later that the family group chat, the one I was never in, went very quiet and then quietly dissolved. The way things do when the story that held them together turns out to be false. Marcus texted me, I'm sorry it took me so long to say something. I told him he was one of the good ones and that his grandmother had known it too. I opened Nana's letter that night, alone, in her chair, the way I'd found everything. I won't read you all of it. Some things stay between a grandmother and the girl she raised, but I'll tell you the shape of it. She wrote that she knew what her children were like, that she'd loved them and raised them and seen them clearly, all at once, the way only a mother can. She wrote that she'd paid for everything in advance because she couldn't bear the thought of me. Standing in a funeral home while people who never lifted a finger for her handed me a bill and called it fair. They will try to make you the outsider, she wrote. You were never the outsider. You were the one I trusted. That's why your name is on the paper, and not theirs. Let the paper say it, so you don't have to. Let the paper say it, so you don't have to. She'd even known how I would want to handle it. She'd known I wouldn't want to shout. She'd built me a way to win without becoming someone she wouldn't recognize. People ask me sometimes, the few I've told this story to, whether I forgave them. Carol, Dennis. And the honest answer is complicated. I don't spend my nights hating them. Hate is a full-time job, and I have better things to do with my one life. But I also don't pretend it didn't happen. They tried to use my grandmother's death to shame me and take my money, and they nearly succeeded. And the only reason they didn't is that a woman I loved had looked further into the future than they ever bothered to look, and quietly closed the door. What I feel, mostly, is a strange and steady peace. Because for 3 years, they told everyone I was living off her. And it turned out she was the one making sure I'd be protected long after she was gone. For 3 years, they called me the greedy one. And it turned out her final financial act on this earth was a gift to me and a refusal of them. The story they built collapsed under one piece of paper, 3 years old, paid in full. I kept the Frisia receipt. Isn't that funny? Out of all of it, the contract, the letter, the whole dark week, the thing I keep in the shoebox now, the shoebox of receipts by year that I inherited from her, along with the habit, is the receipt for the flowers I chose to pay for myself. Because it's the one bill in the whole story that was actually mine to pay, and I paid it gladly, and it was for something she loved. Here is what I understand now that I didn't before. Love keeps quiet records. The people who really carry you don't announce it. They don't post it, they don't tally it, they don't remind you at Thanksgiving how much you owe them. They just quietly, steadily take care of things, sometimes years in advance, in an office on Chestnut Street, so that when the hard day comes, the paper can speak for them. And being chosen is never loud. Carol was loud. Dennis was loud in his patient, heavy way. The group chat was loud. But the truth was one folder on a desk, paid in full, with my name at the top, in my grandmother's hand. I lived in her house for 3 years, and they called it living off her. What I was really doing was learning, one ordinary day at a time, that I was loved. She spent her last well years making sure I would never have to argue for that. And on the day it counted, in a room full of people ready to believe the worst of me, all it took to make the truth stand was a calm woman, a cream-colored folder, and a promise my grandmother had already kept. She liked Frisia. I put fresh ones on the little table by her chair now, the chair I still sit in. And every time I do, I hear her. Don't let them fuss. I don't, Nana. I don't let them fuss. I just let the paper say it.